Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. Tonight's program, Republicans say that they are against deficits. Then they claim that they are for progress in this country and that they are against obstruction, and the Democrats do more obstruction. The Democrats claim the opposite. We can't tell. Donald Trump says that North America is a continent, not a continent, sorry, but a planet. We will earnestly debate it later in the program. Have you figured out what my costume is yet so far? Yes, mainstream media. What I'm amused by is I come in a tie and no one asks me, hey, what's going on with the tie? Oh, you guessed it, okay. I gotta get this thing off of me, man. It's chafing me, All right, let's see if I do any damage taking it off. All right, it is in fact Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. Bad news is I'm going trick-or-treating with my kids, so I won't be in the post game, but John and Brett will do it. And so look forward to that if you're a member, tyt.com/join. Okay, how did we do there? Is this okay now? Okay, all right. And by the way, guys, we're going old school, as you can tell today. I'm gonna do the first hour by myself, so you know that means it's actually gonna be an hour and a half. And John, who's coming in the second hour, also knows that. Anyway, and right after Halloween, you know what happens. The season is upon us. So give the gift of TYT. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Send it all throughout the country. tyt.com/gift is a good way to do that. You can also upgrade your account if you're a member at tyt.com/upgrade. Become a higher level producer and obviously join. tyt.com/yes if you're wondering what that is. That's when you like what we're saying on air and you go, yes! And you want to give us a little bit of money to help support the home of progressives. But gifting is a great way to spread the message, the progressive message of the Young Turks in this what is the upcoming holiday season. Okay, so tyt.com/gift, and obviously you can get stuff from our shop too at shop.tyt.com. Okay, now I got an amazing show for you guys, and actually in the second hour when John comes in, he has a story about wealth disparity in this country that is mind-blowing. You have to hear those numbers. You'll be quoting it to all your friends and family because they are stunning. So that's in the second hour. In the second segment, which is the next segment after this one, we're gonna do one of the most amazing stories. This is, like every once in a while, there's a story I'm proud to bring you guys, and it is this one about how Donald Trump used fake news to win the presidency in the first place. It's anatomy of a hit job, do not miss it. That's a little bit later in this program. And so a lot of fantastic news. So let's just get to it because we gotta go. So let's start with my friend Don Lemon, okay? I don't know the guy at all. I don't know why I called him my friend. I like saying that. All right, now we're going over here. Look at this switcheroo, old school. Okay, it's a very mild switchover. All right, here we go. So Don Lemon said something on TV the other day that enraged the right wing. Surprise, surprise. Okay, they're easily triggered. So we're gonna show you what Don Lemon said, and then we're gonna show you that it is true, and then we're gonna try to find a safe space for conservatives who were triggered by it. So let's watch.
I keep trying to point out to people not to demonize any one group or any one ethnicity, but we keep thinking that the biggest terror threat is something else. Some people who are marching, towards the border like it's imminent. So we have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right. And we have to start doing something about them. There is no travel ban on them. There is no ban on, they had the Muslim ban. There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that?
Okay, so that is factually correct, and hence the right wing is losing their mind. See, when they attack other races, they find that to be perfectly normal. When you just simply point out facts about their race, they flip out. Okay, so we're gonna get to their outrage in a second. So first, let me show you the numbers. So is extremism on the rise in the past 15 years? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. As you can see in this graphic, it is significantly on the rise. Oh, look at that. It really takes a big jump around 2015. I wonder who came onto the national stage around then, but that's okay. That's, just a sense of where the trend is going. The more important part is, well, is it really right-wing extremists who happen to be white? Or is it the Muslims, the Latinos, the blacks? They're prone to violence, okay? I mean, there's scary caravans coming. That is what Don Lemon was talking about, right? So let's go to the numbers from the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism. Over the last decade, 71% of domestic extremist-related killings in the US were linked to right-wing extremists, while Islamic extremists committed 26% of the killings, the report notes. Now, that is far too high a number for Muslim extremists given their percentage of the population. And so it's a fair argument to have about why that's the case, what are the different factors that go into it, et cetera. Okay, but let's note that about 3/4 of the violence done by extremists and the murders done by extremists in this country over the last decade are by white right-wingers. That's a fact. If you want to cry about that fact, that's up to you. Okay, but that is a fact. So now, and by the way, if you want to do a sophisticated look into why that is, do I think it's just because they're white? Not remotely. That would be a preposterous way of looking at it. That would be a right-wing way of looking at it. Oh, it's Muslims. Me say Muslims. Me have courage to say it, right? No, there's a great number of different things that go into a geopolitical, socioeconomic, and is that true of right-wing extremists as well? Of course it is. It's not just because they're white or just because they're right-wing. There are factors that go into those numbers, and we should have an intelligent discourse about that instead of saying, the idea that whites would be violent, that's crazy, you're racist. Hilarious. Okay, now, how about the left wing though? Left-wing extremists and those who didn't fall into the previous two categories carried out the other 3% of deaths. Now, by the way, that's left-wing and all other categories combined, 3%. Right-wing, 71% of extremist deaths in this country. So Don Lemon is absolutely correct. Now, that doesn't mean you should ban white people or white guys or right-wingers. Of course not. What Don Lemon is pointing out is that you have suggested banning, the right wing has suggested banning Muslims, banning Latinos and immigrants from the country, and that is based on no facts, especially in the case of the immigrants in the caravan that they're talking about. Are undocumented immigrants more likely to commit crime? No, the answer is no. There are study after study shows that among this, there's basically three categories: native-born Americans, legal immigrants, and undocumented immigrants. The ones that are prone to the least amount of violence by a landslide are legal immigrants. Second is undocumented immigrants. The ones that are prone to the most amount of violence is native-born Americans. And by the way, native-born Americans of all races, okay? So now that's a fact. That doesn't mean you should hate native-born Americans, or you should kick them out and only accept the caravan and they now own the country. You should have an interesting conversation about what led to those factors. But is it true that undocumented immigrants are prone to violence? No, the numbers show the opposite, So is it fair to point that out? Of course it's fair to point that out. So that equally obvious is that the right wing's gonna flip out. So Brett Hume on Twitter says, I could hardly believe he actually said that. But the video shows he certainly did. Remarkable. How dare you say something against white right-wingers in this country? Remarkable. They make it seem like, well, obviously the white right wing would never do anything violent. That's an obvious fact. It was the blacks who enslaved the whites in this country, right? It was the Native Americans who wiped out the whites in this country, right? Oh no, right, it was the reverse. Now, does that mean all white people are guilty, especially today? Of course not. But it puts facts on its head when the right wing pretends that other races are intrinsically, inherently violent and dangerous and must be kept out of the country. But white people, especially right-wingers, or in this case, in reality, specifically right-wingers, like the idea, can you believe he said that they cause more extremism and we should be concerned about that? Remarkable. It's only remarkable to you because you come at it from your perspective. Okay, so let me give you more. Jason Howerton says, So quotes Don Lemon saying, so we have to stop demonizing people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men. Don Lemon said this with a straight face. Yeah, because that's how anchors report facts. Okay, and I'm gonna repeat for the 28th time because they're gonna pretend that we say things we didn't say. Is it all white people in the country? Of course not. Only a simpleton, like a conservative, would think that way. In fact, of course, a great number of white people, a huge percentage vote Democrat, are progressive, are wonderful people. But if you're looking at what is causing the violence, extremism, terrorism in this country, it happens to be white right-wingers. Joe Biggs says, so because of my skin color, I'm a terrorist, Don Lemon? No, he didn't say that at all, nor is anyone on the left saying that. They're just saying that the percentage of people who do terrorism in this country are unfortunately much higher in terms of white right-wingers. That happens to be a fact. It doesn't mean all white people are guilty. Only an idiot would think that. Someone like you who says, oh, well, the Latinos, they're immigrants, they're the one causing all the crime. When, by the way, not only is that based on race, but it's also wrong. So it's a double whammy. They're projecting the things that they do onto Don Lemon and others. Todd Starn says, again, quotes Don Lemon, you saw it, and he says, is that unadulterated racism or bigotry? No, once again, no, it is not. And I love it, they can't wait to be the victims. So the minute that anyone uses their race in a sentence, they're like, oh, you're racism, they say something about white people, it's a racism. I finally get to say racism. I finally get to say it and be the victim, right? But you say stuff about Latinos, blacks, Muslims, nonstop. But you think, well, they had it coming. They're Latinos. I mean, Trump, and you applauded him and you voted for him and you defend him today. He called Latino immigrants criminals and rapists. You talk about how Muslims, the Muslim religion is inherently violent all the time. That's actually not true. Of course, you've never read the Quran, etc. It has violent parts, it has peaceful parts, but again, that's a sophisticated conversation they don't want to have. You said immigrants were prone to violence. You said people that are not of our culture are more prone to violence. It was all lies. It was all based on race. And now when someone points out a fact, all of a sudden, you're shocked and chagrined and look for a safe space. Well, sorry, there isn't one, and your point of view is preposterous. So, unfortunately, though, these right-wingers are in charge of the government. So last thing on this is the effects of this. And it's real because Trump is in the White House. So a report from the Daily Beast about a recent Department of Homeland Security meeting. Let me quote it for you. On Tuesday, just days after a white supremacist gunned down 11 people at a synagogue, and just a week after a terrorist mailed more than a dozen bombs to critics of the president, the Department of Homeland Security, created after 9/11 to protect the United States from terrorism, had a conference call. Now, this makes sense, okay? Here's Department of Homeland Security doing what it's supposed to do. You got a terrorist who killed 11 people in a synagogue. You've got a terrorist who sent over a dozen bombs. Let's find out what the topic was. The topic, quote, a group of Central American migrants slowly wending their way through Mexico in hopes of seeking asylum in the United States. Some participants were flummoxed in the face of the most lethal anti-Semitic terror attack in American history. Was the Department of Homeland Security really focused exclusively on migrants? And the answer was yes. Those reporters talked to 9 different officials and former officials. And they said, yes, they got together. They didn't talk about terrorism at all. Why? Right-wingers did it. So they're not gonna protect you. They're not gonna look at the facts. They're not gonna actually take action to do what their mission is, because they have politicized the Department of Homeland Security and the whole government apparatus. It is not meant to protect you. It is meant to protect their ideology while they pretend to be the victims. They're real victims. And they're buried in Pennsylvania today. And the Department of Homeland Security, because of these right-wingers and their sensitivities, refuse to look into it. They have a call, and all they talk about is the caravan. They're not even in the country. So this is the monsters on the right pretending to be victims, when in reality, they do nothing about the real extremism in this country that is predominantly factually, obviously driven by the extreme right wing. Okay, I'm clear. We're moving on. Now, speaking of the extreme right wing, we go to Steve King. He's in the news again. Okay. So, Steve King can't stop getting himself in trouble, but he doesn't think he's in trouble. He thinks, isn't everybody a white supremacist? So now if you think, hey, white supremacist, this guy's a member of Congress. That seems a little heavy. Are you sure about that, Cenk? Yeah, I'm positive. So, and I can prove it to you. So he recently met with members of a far-right Austrian group with links to the Nazi Party. So that happened. Now, meeting with them in the first place is deeply problematic. But for the first time, Steve King was perhaps accidentally right. And he said if they were in America pushing the platform that they push, they would be Republicans. Well, that is certainly true. That party is very right-wing, and the right wing in this country are Republicans, and they have elected officials representing them in the United States Congress like Steve King. So, yes, indeed, if the Nazi-linked party came here, they would be Republicans. For the first time, I agree with Steve King. Steve Stivers, who is representing the Republicans in the House in the election season, did not like that comment. I don't know his personal opinions. He's in the Republican Party, so I imagine they're not great, but he at least recognizes not a good way to win elections. Now, Steve King might think, hey, the whole country is racist like me, right? That's how, I don't know, that's how Republicans have been winning elections for decades. We did the Southern strategy. We ran against black people in the beginning, then against gay people. We're running against Latinos now and trans people. We scare the hell out of them and we do racist, bigoted strategy. I don't get it. What's the problem, right? Well, the country's changed, and apparently Stivers understands that, and he said, quote, Congress, this is the Republican. Congressman Steve King's recent comments, actions, and retweets are completely inappropriate. We must stand up against white supremacy and hate in all forms, and I strongly condemn this behavior. Now, look, I think that the Republican Party thinks, hey, Steve, you're supposed to use a dog whistle, not your actual human voice. You're not supposed to actually say, yay, Nazis. We're supposed to say, English is a second language, or as a first language, as the only language. We're supposed to use code words. In fact, that is part of this story that we don't have time for, but I will share that with you in tomorrow's postgame about how Steve King started using dog whistles and the history of those dog whistles, and then how he switched over to just simply saying racist things. So tyt.com/join to become a member and get all the postgames. Only the members get the postgames. Okay, now let's continue. Now here are some of the things that he also did recently. Iowa Representative Steve King on Wednesday, this was a couple of weeks ago, endorsed a candidate in Toronto's mayoral election who was fired by an alt-right media outlet after she appeared on a podcast produced by a neo-Nazi website. I feel like I see a pattern here. She was fired by the alt-right for being too pro-Nazi. Okay, and Steve King jumps in. He tweeted on Wednesday his support for this person, Faith Goldie, a former employee of Rebel Media and a candidate in Toronto's upcoming mayoral election, by calling Goldie, quote, pro-Western civilization and a fighter for our values. Well, that seems pretty clear. By the way, if you're wondering, well, how neo-Nazi is she? Goldie was fired last year by Rebel Media after she appeared on a podcast for the Daily Stormer, the world's biggest neo-Nazi website, during which she recited the 14-word slogan often used as an identifier by white supremacists. Okay, but Steve King's not done yet. And now let's have a little fun by going into his past. In 2008, King said that if Barack Hussein Obama won the presidency, the radical Islamists, the Al-Qaeda, would be dancing in the streets in greater numbers than they did on September 11th, because they would declare victory in this war on terror. Gee, I wonder if that's racist. I can't quite tell. But in case you still haven't been able to piece together where Steve King's going with this, here is a tweet that he had. Europe is waking up, referring to that person, Mark Collette, saying that 65% of Italians are now opposed to mass immigration. Don't trust a word that that guy says. I'll get back to him in a second. He says, will America wake up in time? So who did he retweet with that point about immigration. Oh, that's Mark Collett, a British neo-Nazi. He just does it on a regular basis. When they ask him to apologize, they're like, hey, maybe you didn't know, that's okay. But it turns out he's a neo-Nazi. So do you want to take it down or apologize? He's like, no, I don't want to apologize. Well, then that's crystal clear, super clear. But if you're still not sold on whether Steve King's a racist, let us quote Steve King. Watch.
To the German people and to any population of people that is a declining population that isn't willing to have enough babies to reproduce themselves. And I've said to them, you cannot rebuild your civilization with somebody else's babies. You've got to keep your birth rate up.
Their effort here is to be celebrating because the United States is moving towards becoming the whites becoming a minority, be a majority minority within the country, according to their plan.
This is an effort on the left, I think, to break down the American civilization and the American culture and turn it into something entirely different.
So I talked to Keith Ellison about that, who would be the lead Muslim in Congress. And
for everyone who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there that they weigh 130 pounds and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert.
He's adding up Hispanics and blacks, and he predicts will be in greater number than whites in America. I will predict the Hispanics and the blacks will be fighting each other before that happens.
A Muslim American, an Italian American, a Christian American, a Jewish American, you do realize that they are all equal, right? They are all the same thing. We don't need babies from one of those groups more than we need them from other groups. Do you agree with that?
Well, I would say that it depends.
Why do you pause on a question like that, Congressman?
Well, we know exactly why he pauses. And that was in regards to a tweet he sent out about how we can't, continue our culture with other people's babies. Which other people? Right? And of course he means we got to keep America white. And that's why he paused. He wouldn't even say Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans are the same as Christian Americans. Of course he's not going to say that because he's a racist. And then when you call Steve King a racist based on all the things, overwhelming evidence that you just saw, they're like, oh my God, you guys love, you love to get offended just because he thinks you're other people and you don't belong in this country and he likes neo-Nazis. Now all of a sudden you're offended by Nazis. Yeah, that's right, we are. You should read a little bit of history and figure out what they did. Now I've got great news for you. It turns out, now he's been winning elections all this time in his part of Iowa, right? A poll released Tuesday showed his lead over Democratic challenger J.D. Scholten was down to 1 percentage point. Oh, that would be awesome. If on election night, which of course we'll cover here, TYT.com/live, we'll be on for 12 straight hours, don't miss it. If I can announce to you guys that Steve King's career is over, and J.D. Scholten has sent him to the bullpen. It's not really where you send people, but still, sent him out of the stadium. Okay, relieved him of duty. That would be phenomenal. By the way, you can make that happen. Here's J.D. Scholten's links. ScholtenForIowa.com. You could donate. You could volunteer. There's about 5 days left before the election. We'll put the links down below if you're watching this later on YouTube or Facebook. Get involved and make sure that we send this racist Steve King packing and out of Congress and out of our lives for good. And even the Republicans now recognize, the guy's a monster. And so he's a monster in their midst. And if he wins, he goes back into Congress and he affects national policy. Get him out, get him out, get him out. Okay, I'm clear on that, so we're gonna move forward. Speaking of right-wing extremists, we're not done yet. Okay. Interesting development in a case of terrorism. It was 3 guys who tried to blow up a building full of Muslim immigrants in the middle of the country, and they were convicted of just the offense of weapon of mass destruction. They were trying to use a weapon of mass destruction. So this is as severe a terrorist case as we've had in recent memory in America. Luckily, the FBI caught them. That's why I've been giving the FBI a lot of credit recently, because they have been going around catching these terrorists, no matter which part of the political spectrum they're from, and largely they're from the right wing, obviously, and they are in this case. And so but now their attorneys have a very unique defense in the sentencing portion of the trial. So let me go to HuffPost to tell you about that. Attorneys for President Donald Trump's supporter, who was convicted in a domestic terrorism plot aimed at slaughtering Muslim refugees, asked the federal judge to factor in the backdrop of Trump's campaign rhetoric when deciding their client's sentence. So this is apparently dealing the Trump card. And is it preposterous to say he should receive a lesser sentence because Donald Trump egged him on? Well, let's hear them out and let's decide whether that is crazy or not crazy. Patrick Stein was one of the 3 right-wing militiamen found guilty in April of a conspiracy to kill Muslim refugees living in rural Kansas. So here's a picture of Patrick Stein, and he is known as, or at least he referred to himself as, the Orkin Man. Why? Because he thought Muslims were cockroaches and need to be exterminated. Okay? The men allegedly referred to Muslims as cockroaches and said that the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim, because they were worried that Muslims are terrorists. Note the irony of these terrorists who plan to blow up innocent people because they didn't consider them to be human beings but cockroaches that need to be exterminated, saying Muslims only understand violence. Muslims are the terrorists. Okay, the irony of that is, of course, record-breaking. But was he really a fan of Trump? Now, this was before the election, and it was just as the election season was heating up. According to his own lawyer, he was an early and avid Trump supporter. Okay, not only that, they took politics into consideration as to when they were going to do the bombing. The plot was supposed to take place after the election, as the group didn't want their attack to boost Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. So they knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to support Donald Trump, and they wanted to make sure that Hillary Clinton didn't win, and that is why, luckily, they delayed their plot, and then the FBI, with their informant, caught them. Now we're going to go to James Pratt and Michael Schultz. That's this particular gentleman's attorney, and here's what they had to say in what they filed. They said 2016 was lit. The court cannot ignore the circumstances of one of the most rhetorically mold-breaking, violent, awful, hateful, and contentious presidential elections in modern history, driven in large measure by the rhetorical China shop bull who is now our president. In other words, Trump kept saying violent things, which egged on some of his early and avid supporters to do violent things. So we're going to get into his history in a little bit, Patrick Stein's, and you're going to see why they're making that case. He said they continue to say Trump's brand of rough and tumble verbal pummeling heightened the rhetorical stakes for people of all political persuasions. A person normally at a 3 on a scale of a political talk might have found themselves at a 7 during the election. A person like Patrick, who would often be at a 7 during a normal day, might go to an 11. See Spinal Tap. That climate should be taken into account when evaluating the rhetoric that formed the basis of the government's case. Now, I'm not sure you should be quoting Spinal Tap in a case this serious, where he could get a life sentence, but the point is made, which is that Patrick Stein was already an unstable guy, but egged on by the rhetoric of Donald Trump, he became even more unstable and more willing to take action, physical action, violent action, to carry out his ideology, one that he thought was shared by the president. And then, of course, at the time, Donald Trump was all over television saying we have to ban all Muslims from this country because they are a great danger. So, but it wasn't just Trump. Here's another portion of his defense. His lawyers state his knowledge of the Quran, his attorneys wrote, came directly from the internet and conservative talk show hosts such as Sean Hannity and Michael Savage. Patrick himself had never read the Quran, nor had he participated in a comparative study of any religion. Really, this guy had not studied any of the religions. Of course he hadn't. But that's why all of these people have a responsibility to make sure that they're not egging people on with fearful, hateful rhetoric that leads to division and causes them to do extreme actions. So whether it's the right wing like Sean Hannity or others pretending to be on the left who keep telling you the Muslims are the problem, the Muslims are different. They're a unique problem. Bill Maher, And by the way, Sam Harris and Dave Rubin and all those, Ben Shapiro, all those guys, ranging from right, Donald Trump, Shapiro, et cetera, all the way to people pretending to be on the left. And so all those people who were saying, Patrick Stein, you're right, the Muslims are the problem, the Muslims are the problem. And Stein in his mind thinks, well, somebody's got to do something about it. In fact, the guy who just shot up the synagogue and killed 11 people, his last words on one of these extremist websites was, screw the optics, I'm going in. Like somebody's got to do something about it. The Jews are the ones that are paying for the caravan. So I got to go stop the Jews. And by the way, today, Donald Trump, right before we started the show, said, yes, George Soros might be funding the caravan. That same anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So they egg people on. It's the Jews, it's the Muslims, it's the Jews, Muslims, Latinos, blacks. Aren't you going to do something? And how about Stein? Well, Stein's a ticking time bomb. The attorneys argue that Stein, who had a lifelong struggle with substance abuse and 2 failed marriages, was particularly vulnerable to this sort of rhetoric. Yes, he might have been doing meth as well. So is it purely Donald Trump's fault that they try to bomb these innocent people in the middle of Kansas? Of course not, right? The question isn't whether it's totally Donald Trump's fault or even mainly Donald Trump's fault. The question is, does his rhetoric add to the likelihood that these people are going to take these kind of violent actions? And unfortunately, the answer appears to be yes. Remember, not everybody listening to Sean Hannity or watching Donald Trump is perfectly stable. Like Sean Hannity might think, well, no, nobody I know would take the stuff that I say and do something crazy like this. Everybody at my country club is perfectly pleasant. We all play golf and we talk about how the Muslims are the problem and the blacks and the Latinos are the problem, but we're not gonna go shoot up anybody. We're all rich. We gotta go play golf. Yes, Sean, for you, that's true. But remember, people listening to you are not all in your country club. Some of them have substance abuse problems. Some of them have mental problems. And when you go tell them to fear and loathe the others, sometimes they take you seriously. And they took Trump seriously. Now, it doesn't mean that I think that their defense should work. No, at the end of the day, of course you're personally responsible for the actions that you planned out. Donald Trump wasn't in that room. Sean Hannity, Michael Savage were not in that room. Patrick Stein and his 2 guilty co-defendants, and remember, this is the sentencing. They're already judged guilty. They are guilty. They are terrorists. They're the ones who are responsible. So no, I would not listen to the defense here and give him a lighter sentence because he was egged on. But for the country, what matters for our health and our well-being is that our leaders and people in the media not continue to egg on fear and hatred, because yes, it sometimes leads to actions like this. All right, we got to take a break. These stories were amazing. Wait till you get a load of the next one. It's about the anatomy of a hit job. And it's not just in general, but specifically, amazingly, against Ted Cruz. That's what Trump did to him during the campaign. But when you see the details of that, you'll understand exactly how the right wing used the media to their advantage to spread lies in this country. We'll do that when we return. All right, back on the Young Turks. Let me read some members' comments first. Gabby Marita says, Don Lemon is a person of color on a TV channel that isn't Fox News. He triggers the right wing before he even opens his mouth. That's true, and he also happens to be gay. So they're like a gay black man on CNN. God, the right wing is so triggered.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFDR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
No coming back. And then he says that. They're like, oh, okay. Sartorion Narwhal says, what must it be like to be unable to parse simple facts like 75% of domestic acts of terror are committed by whites? These people must have difficulty with redfish, bluefish. And Brent says, if my father has proven anything, it's that facts have stopped mattering in any way, shape, or form to the right wing. He still considers Nancy Pelosi an extreme liberal, even when I pulled up her voting record online and went through with him. Yeah, they just don't care. And Cabbage on Twitter says, and right-wingers are encouraged to buy guns as if their rhetoric wasn't toxic enough. And P. McEnroe says, the problem isn't whiteness, the problem is extremists on the right are far more likely to turn violent than those on the left. That is 100% right. Of course it doesn't have anything to do with being white. That would be irrational. It has to do with where they are in the political spectrum and their ideology. In this case, unfortunately, the right wing leads to more extremism in this particular country. Last one's from YouTube Super Chat. Hugh Edwards says, it wasn't blacks that killed off Native Americans. Correct. Okay, but just saying that will likely trigger right-wingers. What do you mean? Are you saying that the white people ever did anything violent? Absurd. Okay, guys, the Donald Trump, Ted Cruz story about how they did a hit job on him and they used the mainstream media. We're gonna have to do that in the next segment because some of the graphics weren't ready. Don't worry, we'll do it right after this. But now I got one other story for you guys broken by us, which I think is fantastic. Let's go over here. Okay. Now, Rick Scott currently is running for Senate in Florida. He used to be the governor of Florida. And he also was the CEO of the company that committed the largest Medicare fraud in American history at the time. So fairly well known in the past to be a crook. So this story might not surprise you. So this is a story broken by TYT Investigates. And it is a story, they simply lay out the facts. I will fill in my analysis of it, and it'll be fairly clear to all of you guys as you see these facts. Now at the time, back in 2016, he was running a pro-Trump super PAC. But at the time, he's also the governor of Florida. So that could lead to a conflict of interest, and it turns out it did. So Matthew Cunningham Cook wrote this in conjunction with The Intercept, and he explains, a Florida state agency invested $200 million with a massive Wall Street private equity firm 1 week after the firm's CEO donated to a super PAC run by Florida Governor Rick Scott, TYT has learned. Okay, so I'm gonna break it down for you guys and show you the flow chart in a second. But the Wall Street equity firm somehow gets $200 million from the state of Florida, run by Rick Scott, after they gave to a super PAC run by Rick Scott. Things that make you go, The transactions came in run up to the 2016 presidential election. Scott, a Republican, ran the pro-Trump super PAC at the same time. He served as trustee of the Florida agency, the State Board of Administration. The SBA manages the state's investments, about 80% of which are for the state pension funds, 1 million members and retirees. Now, that is a very important responsibility because that's your retirement money that he's playing with. So I'm gonna show you at the end how they did, because they're supposed to invest your money and get you a good return. If this isn't about corruption, well, then it probably got you a fantastic return. We'll find out, because this is your retirement money in Florida, okay, that he's using for his own political purposes. So here's the flow chart. On September 26th of 2016, Steven Feinberg, who is the CEO of Cerberus, gives $500,000 to Rick Scott's super PAC. Now, the Supreme Court and the right wing would say, oh no, he just spoke to Rick Scott. No, he didn't speak to him. He gave him $500,000. It's not speech, it's money. And it's not for his health, it's for a bribe. It's a legal bribe in this country, which is what makes our system insane and the most corrupt in the world, because we legalize bribery. That's $500,000, $500,000 that Feinberg personally gave to Rick Scott's super PAC. Okay, well, it's not a bribe if he didn't get anything in return, so let's find out if he did. Rick Scott's SBA, that's the administration that he's running for Florida, playing with your pensions, then gives $200 million to Feinberg's firm, Cerberus. So Feinberg is $500,000. He gets $200 million in return. Now, they don't get the whole $200 million. That's for them to invest, and then they're going to make a lot of money off that investment. I'm going to tell you how much in a second. But that's on October 3rd. So the money went one way, and then it came back around. Okay, well, they're not going to be so crass as to complete the bribe afterwards, are they? Yes, they are. On November 3rd, Feinberg then gives another $975,000 to Rick Scott's super PAC. He's like, well, I'm giving you this $500,000. We have an understanding, right? Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm not promising you anything. Oh, here's $200 million for you to play around with and make money off of. Yes, our understanding was correct. Here's another basically $1 million for your super PAC. Make sure Trump wins so we can fill up the swamp with this kind of corruption. And he did, and they have. So, spokesperson for the SBA in Florida says any suggestion of a link between individual contributions made and SBA investment decisions would be patently false. Well, you just saw how the money flowed. Do you think it's patently false? Do you think that Rick Scott happened to just make sure that Feinberg's firm got that $200 million right after they got a $500,000 donation, and then afterwards they get another $975,000? That's just a coincidence. He was going to give them the $200 million anyway. Did he? Oh, is it Feinberg's firm? Oh, I didn't even know that. Does anyone in their right mind believe that? Does any conservative actually believe that? No, you know this is corruption. It's corruption 101. And they're doing it while playing with your money. Okay, so let's talk about that. So Cerberus, like I told you, they don't get the whole $200 million. Let's be fair. Okay, they're supposed to invest that. So what do they get? Well, they get 2% of all the assets and 20% of performance. Now, if you're not familiar with hedge funds or private equity, you might think, well, what does that mean? Well, since they say they're so good at investing, every year they're going to get the equivalent of 2% of the entirety of the $200 million and put it in their pocket. Just because their brilliance is going to lead to better results. So even if you don't make any money at all, even if your stocks go down, they're going to get that 2% anyway. That's $4 million. Now, they gave about 1.5. On the 2% alone, they already got $4 million every year from your pensions. And then they get 20% of however much your money went up. So they get 20% of the proceeds plus 2% of the overall pot. Now that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money, okay? Now, that is how much they charge. Well, what if the state of Florida just took the pensions and put it into an index fund? Index fund is basically just goes with the market, goes up and down with the market, but largely it's been going up. Well, does that have equally onerous charges? No, quite the opposite. An index fund charges you just 0.05%. Not 2%, not 1%, not 0.2%, 0.05%, and there's no 20% either. So that is way, way, way lower than what Cerberus charges. But in fact, the Cerberus fee is 10,000% higher than the index fund. They charge 10,000% more. Well, for 10,000% more, you better get amazing performance. Oh, well, look, I have good news for you, Florida. Cerberus's performance, actually, they did make money. 7.7% annualized rate of return from October 2016 when they had the money to March of 2018 when this analysis was done. So not bad, at least your money went up 7.7%. Maybe it was worth it, maybe it wasn't corruption. Well, wait, we do have to do one other thing. How did the index fund perform at the same time? The one that cost much, much less. Oh, wow. It performed at a 20.1% annualized rate. So if the state of Florida had just paid 0.05% and put it into an index fund, it would have made 3 times as much money. It would have tripled the amount of return that you would get if you had a pension with the state of Florida. They robbed you of that money On top of that, they robbed you of the money that they are giving in those outrageous fees to Cerberus. Why? Because the CEO of the company gave a bribe to Rick Scott and Donald Trump. And that's how politics is played in America. So from time to time, we wag our finger at other countries for their corruption. Well, at least it's not systemic and institutionalized like this. This is what money in politics does. It allows for open bribery because all of it is now legal because of Citizens United and other Supreme Court decisions. You only have one choice. You have got to get the money out. If you don't, they're going to keep on robbing you blind day after day after day with criminals like Rick Scott. Now, because in America, corporations are on everything, even though he committed the largest Medicare fraud in American history, he didn't go to jail. His company is not an actual person, despite what the Supreme Court says, so they didn't go to jail. They paid a fine smaller than the amount that they robbed of the American people in that case. And Rick Scott went on to become governor, and then he went on to give away your pension fund to his friends who gave to his PACs. wolf-pac.com/join. Wolfpack is going to get an amendment, and we're going to get money out of politics. A progressive wave is coming. If we don't use it to get money out of politics, then we've accomplished nothing. Because they'll just bring the stuff back and they'll continue the corruption. You have got to end the corruption at its root. And the root is money in politics. It is private financing of elections. If you do private financing of elections, people like Rick Scott will serve private interests who have given them money. You do public financing of elections, and they might, just might, represent us, the public. Go join Wolfpack today. Brilliant job by TYT Investigates to show you the facts. And unfortunately, this is the heart of the problem in America. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the story that I promised you, that's amazing anatomy of a hit job and how the mainstream media is used as suckers to spread lies in America. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, guys, lots to get to, so I'm going to read comments a little bit later. I'm going to go so much into John Zauer. Now he's going to kill me instead of Anna. tyt.com/join to make sure you get the whole show. One of the best. At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen, guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today. Stories is in John Zauer. All right, let's go over here and do the story that I promised you guys. Okay. So this is an amazing story of how fake news actually works and how Donald Trump actually used it to become president of the United States, and unfortunately, how the mainstream media was complicit in it. I'm going to explain how they use the weakness of the mainstream media against it as we do this story. It is the story of the National Enquirer. It is run by American Media Incorporated. The head of that organization used to be David Pecker, who is a personal friend of Donald Trump, or at least was, and wanted to get him elected. So he had his organization lie over and over and over again to the benefit of Donald Trump. And he used it to smear all of Donald Trump's opponents. Pecker, at this point, has given evidence to Robert Mueller and the special counsel against Donald Trump, presumably. We're going to find out probably after the elections exactly what he did, because part of it was that Pecker helped to cover up Donald Trump's affairs. He paid off Karen McDougal on behalf of Donald Trump so that she would not come out with the story that she was his mistress. And they bought that story claiming they were going to run it, but instead they spiked it to protect Donald Trump. Now, the other things that they did was to go after all of his opponents, including Ted Cruz. That's the heart of this story. But I want to give you a snippet of what they did overall. And HuffPost did an amazing job with this story in tracking it. And they explained that in editorial meetings, Dylan Howard, who was the one who ran those meetings, so one of the top executives there, would make up the story angle or that story angle, literally just shooting out ideas, whether it's Hillary's going to die or Trump declares whatever. That is by an anonymous former American Media Incorporated employee. And HuffPost talked to several of those former employees, and that is the basis of this story about what happened inside the National Enquirer. And so what you just saw there is the definition of fake news, where they get in a room and they just make up stories. They're like, okay, here's a name, Ben Carson, for example. Let's figure out a story we can make up about him to smear him. Why does Donald Trump constantly accuse the press of making up stories and being fake news? Because that's what he did. That's what he and his allies did to win. So maybe he assumes they do the same kind of dirty tricks that he does. Maybe he's not bright enough to know that actually most journalists don't go into a room and just make up stories. They actually do investigations, and they could have a different perspective or bias, but they don't go and willy-nilly just pick things out of the air and pretend they're true, which is exactly what the National Enquirer did on his behalf. But there's a lot more where that came from. Now, one of the theories that they came up with was that Ted Cruz's dad helped to kill JFK. Now, I'm not the one that's saying that's crazy. Well, I am. Any rational person knows that's crazy. But it turns out the employees that made up the story knew it was crazy. Here's one of their quotes. We all sort of went, well, what? That's insane. Yes, let's do that. They thought the thing that we are going to print is insane and obviously not true, so let's do it. That's the definition of fake news. That's what Donald Trump used and loved, while he now pretends that people who do actual journalism are fake news. Okay, now, before we even get to Ted Cruz's dad, they had already run 1,000 smears, so let's do that. And Maxwell Strachan did a great job with this investigation for HuffPost. So I'm quoting him here when he says, by that point, the Enquirer newsroom had already spent months trying to make every presidential candidate outside of Trump look bad. It had proclaimed that Hillary Clinton had 6 months to live and yelled about Marco Rubio's cocaine connection. The Enquirer had called Carly Fiorina a homewrecker and written a story about bungling surgeon Ben Carson allegedly once leaving a sponge in a patient's brain. By the way, those stories went not only to the right wing, but some of those were quoted by the left wing in the primaries against Hillary Clinton, and even in the general election. Oh, she's about to die any second. I came on the program and said, you guys have no evidence for that. That's not remotely true. If there's one person who has a brain damage in this race, it isn't Hillary Clinton, okay? But these lies are spread around not just the internet, but look, the National Enquirer has been around forever. They were around before the internet, and they were profitable all those years. And here's one of the sad facts that you get out of this story and out of the realization of what they do on a regular basis. People actually, not everybody, and in fact not a majority, but a significant minority love conspiracy theories. They love them. So you give them a conspiracy theory, they're like, yes, of course, Hillary Clinton's about to die. By the way, it's 2018, she still hasn't died. Of course, they made it up. They made it up. Okay, and they're the ones saying it. All right, by comparison, the tabloid had done seemingly everything it could to portray Trump as a living, quote, legend who could seemingly do no wrong. You want to talk about fake news. So here's another former employee. There was also a feeling that we can print these silly things and no one's going to believe them. But brother, I mean, maybe that's how you got yourself to sleep at night, but National Enquirer didn't sell all those magazines for all those decades because people didn't believe it. Yeah, some people bought it as a joke, but no, most of the people who bought it believe the insane stuff that you print, and that is a danger to the world. Okay, and when in fact that they did believe the Ted Cruz's dad's story, that employee said, quote, there was shock and horror. They couldn't believe that anyone else would take their fake news seriously. But they did, partly because of a trick that Donald Trump did, which I'm going to tell you about in a second. Rick Tyler worked for Ted Cruz as one of his top campaign staffers at the time running against Donald Trump. And he explains, look, the attitude about the National Enquirer was kind of like, oh yeah, that's that tabloid that prints things that mostly aren't true, and therefore it didn't seem to be a political factor. I think that was a mistake. Yes, it was a mistake. And by the way, how often are people going to make this mistake? Same thing when John Kerry got swift-boated back in 2004, when they made up lies about his service in Vietnam, when Bush hadn't even gone to Vietnam. And Kerry had gone and received medals for his bravery. And they pretended that he was the guy who was not brave and had done things wrong in Vietnam and was not courageous, etc. They turned the truth on its head, and John Kerry didn't respond. Oh, you don't respond to those things. No, you do respond. You'd be shocked. And in fact, the National Enquirer was shocked at how many people believe these insane lies. Okay. Another former employee, during the primary season, whoever got close to Trump's numbers-wise would become the next target, whether it was Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Ben Carson. So they went on to explain, it was really tied to opinion polls. When somebody got close to Donald Trump in an opinion poll, that became the next target. Now pause there to understand. So Donald Trump would often say about the press, oh, they do this because they don't like me politically. No, they investigate things, and if it turns out you did tax fraud, they report that you did tax fraud. If it turns out you didn't do tax fraud, then they don't report that. It isn't tied to their political opinions. The reason Donald Trump projects that onto the press is because that is exactly what his side does. It doesn't matter if Ben Carson did any of the things that he's alleged, or Carly Fiorina or Hillary Clinton. It doesn't matter. If you're challenging Donald Trump, we will then print negative so-called news against you. Because that's the whole point of their fake news, is to do propaganda. See, when you put it on the same grounds as real news, it becomes a problem. And so the heart of that is coming up in a little bit. But here's another example. A September piece about Fiorina's druggy daughter, quote unquote, followed her vault from 11th place to 4th. When the Enquirer ran with a story about Rubio's cocaine connection in December, he had just finished his own steady 3-month climb back into contention. So the minute anybody rises, National Enquirer does a fake story about them, and especially the right wing. The right wing is prone to believe fake news. They're prone to believe conspiracy theories. Look, people take great offense in this, but look at them. It's not exclusively right wing. I told you some of the left wing believed it too, but as a matter of percentages, the right wing is not very educated. A lot of Donald Trump's voters were absolutely ignorant. And so when they see, oh yeah, I bet Marco Rubio is peddling cocaine and he has a cocaine connection. That sounds right to me. Of course they believe that. They believe it immediately. And so they believe whatever they want to believe. And so they continue. By the previous August, Pecker, that's the head of the company, had quietly entered into an agreement with Michael Cohen, Trump's then fixer and personal attorney, to suppress potentially damaging stories about Trump in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election, according to court documents filed by prosecutors this summer. So the point is, in their vision of the news, you make up stories out of thin air and you use it for political purposes to bury your opponents. And that is exactly what they charge the actual press of doing when they don't do that. It is because they are the ones who did fake news. Now, let's go to the specific example of Ted Cruz's dad. By the way, the first time they attacked Ted Cruz, it was not about his dad. It was that they claimed he had 5 mistresses. Now, I can't stand Ted Cruz, and I came out immediately and said, that's the most unbelievable story I've ever heard. 5 different people slept with Ted Cruz? No way. Okay, he had 5 mistresses? Come on. It's the National Enquirer, for Christ's sake, right? People are like, no, I believe it. I don't like Ted Cruz, so I believe it. Whether they were Trump supporters or, again, some smaller percentage on the left. And so, but that one didn't stick, and I'm gonna tell you why the second one stuck. So they ran a headline, Ted Cruz's father linked to JFK assassination. Giant headline. Now, is that true? No, of course not. And they go on to say, next to the bold assertion was the photo of Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald in 1963, with another man whom the Enquirer labeled unequivocally on its cover as Rafael Cruz, Ted Cruz's dad. Was it true? No, who cares? But that didn't They didn't get a lot of traction in the mainstream press. It did online and in the internet forums, et cetera, and spreading, and so did the mistress thing. But it didn't get enough traction in the mainstream press, so Donald Trump decided he was gonna step in. He went on Fox and said this.
His father was with Lee Harvey Oswald prior to Oswald's being, shot. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. What is this right prior to his being shot? And nobody even brings it up.
But,
what was he doing with Lee Harvey Oswald shortly before the death, before the shooting? It's horrible.
So he just took fake news, and you're gonna see in a little bit, he knew it was fake, and just put it out there. Because there is a weakness that the mainstream press has. They wanna call everything 50-50, and he used it against them. So now, to me, there's a lot of amazing parts of the story, but this is the most important. Because of the hubbub, as HuffPost reports, because of the hubbub, the conspiracy theory went viral because Trump, the guy who was winning in the Republican nomination at that point, he had not won it yet, but he was close to winning it. He talked about it, and then Cruz had to say it wasn't true, so it went viral. Unable to definitively say on the fly that it wasn't Ted Cruz's father in the photo, many media outlets that day ran straightforward headlines. Quote, Donald Trump links Ted Cruz's dad to JFK assassination. Quote, Donald Trump associates Ted Cruz's father with JFK assassin. Quote, Donald Trump accuses Ted Cruz's father of plotting JFK's assassination. And quote, Donald Trump suggests Ted Cruz's father was involved in the JFK assassination. And then Google searches for Ted Cruz JFK skyrocketed. See what the mainstream press did there? Well, they're like, well, I mean, it seems absurd that it's the idea that it's Ted Cruz's father, but I would be called biased if I say it's not true. And remember, now they're a little bit more bolder against Donald Trump, but back then they were even more cowed. And but he'll call me biased. He'll call me biased. I can't be called biased. He'll say I have a liberal bias. I can't. No. So we'll just report it straight. And so when you have dozens of headlines, in fact, probably hundreds of headlines all across the country saying Donald Trump says that Ted Cruz's father was linked to JFK's assassination, people don't read that and go, oh, that must not be true. That is the assumption that people who work in the press have because they think, well, no one could really believe that. No, they do believe it. That's why you have to be extraordinarily careful with your headlines. And when you call it even, what happens? People read, oh, I guess he was involved in the assassination. I guess Ted Cruz's dad's a killer. I guess he helped to kill JFK. I don't know, it said it in the headline. It didn't say it didn't happen in the headline. It didn't say it was absurd. It didn't say it was a fake news attack against Ted Cruz. And listen, I said it at the time, I'm saying it now. I can't stand Ted Cruz, but you can't spread lies about someone. You have to actually care about doing your job right and care about reality. And I would argue that the mainstream press was negligent, as they were with Iraq and as they are over and over again, when they take lies by the right wing, in this case Donald Trump, and call it even. And then they spread that message all across. And what did you do? You equated the lies to truth and hence hurt the cause of truth. And in this case, it helped Donald Trump win the state of Indiana and put away Ted Cruz. Here's back to the anonymous former National Enquirer employees. They said, I remember Dylan Howard expressing disbelief that this completely BS story had resonated. The guys who started the fake news in the first place couldn't believe that the mainstream press were suckers enough to run credulous headlines about it when they should have ripped that story apart. But by the way, if you do it 3 days later after the elections, or you do it 3 weeks later, or you do it on page A17 instead of page A1, not good enough, not good enough. So stop believing the lies and calling it even. All right, here's another former employee. I think we were all pretty stunned. We all found it very amusing that suddenly something we wrote that we knew to be BS was, suddenly leading presidential candidates are talking about a National Enquirer story that had no merit. Now, did Donald Trump know that? Yeah. Did he purposely lie about it? Yes. Now, again, if you're in the mainstream press, oh, no, you can't say he lied. No, well, his statements don't match the other statements, and I'm gonna call it even in the headline. No, he lied. Here's evidence that he lied. Donald Trump himself.
Yesterday with this National Enquirer story, I just want you to clarify. You don't really believe that Ted Cruz's father had anything to do with the assassination of President Kennedy?
No, I don't.
And you don't believe in that conspiracy?
Of course I don't believe that. I wouldn't believe it, but I did say let people read it.
See, he never believed it. And he spread it anyway, because that's what Donald Trump does. He does fake news. It's not even, guys. You have to actually call it out for what it is. Otherwise, you are helping him deceive the American people. Okay. But, by the way, did he stop lying about it? No. If you remember, during the convention, Ted Cruz came out and did not endorse Donald Trump in his speech. And there was a lot of blowback from that, and Donald Trump was very unhappy. So what happened afterwards? One day after he formally accepted the Republican Party's nomination for president, Trump brought up the Enquirer's JFK story once again, stating that Cruz had never denied the man in the photo was his father, even though Cruz's communications director had done exactly that. Now remember, that's after the video you just saw. In the video, he says, well, I know it's not true. Of course, it's ridiculous. Afterwards, he turns around and says, yeah, that's right. It was him. He's the one who did it. He's the one that was part of the assassination. Why? Because he's attacking his political opponent again. And he thinks that's fair game. He explained to Wolf Blitzer in that same interview. He's like, well, I was in a race against him and I hadn't won yet. He doesn't mind lying. He thinks it's a smart strategy. And every time you don't call him a liar, you help him. You help him spread those lies. Okay. Now back to the employees. What we've learned from Trump is if you repeat the lie often enough, there's a scary amount of people who will believe it. Well, that is certainly true. And they went on to say there was plenty of self-reflection. The guilt was pretty heavy too, after they realized that they had in fact had an effect on the elections and people had believed their lies. The former employee says, I definitely think there was a sense of horror for many people there, said the other. I know for sure some people had a serious problem with what they had helped wrought. Okay, except one person. When they asked Donald Trump at a later time, in fact recently, just as he was going to endorse Ted Cruz in his Senate race now, do you regret what you said about Ted Cruz's father? He said, quote, I don't regret anything, honestly. It all worked out very nicely. Well, it did for him, I guess. He's the president. He used the media to spread his lies, then turned around and blamed them for the things that he does on a regular basis. So that's how you do a hit job in America, and that's how you sucker the mainstream press into helping you do that hit job. So if you think the press and the CNNs of the world and the New York Times of the world are too tough on Donald Trump, not remotely true. If they were actually delivering the truth objectively and not worried about being called biased, they would be far harsher on him, not because of their politics, but because of the reality. He is a pathological liar, and they should call it out as it is and not say some people say this and some people say that, and we can't quite tell. Your job is to tell. Your job is to tell the truth and to fight this fake news. I don't know if they've learned something from it, but I sure hope they have, so that he doesn't get away with it again. All right, last story for you guys. Okay, and here they are again. They're doing the same kind of smear. So Robert Mueller, of course, is the special counsel investigating Donald Trump. Donald Trump has called his investigation a witch hunt. Well, it turns out there is a witch hunt, but it's actually against Robert Mueller. That's a story that is in the press today. Adam Goldman, writing for the New York Times, explains, the Office of the Special Counsel, Robert S. Mueller, has asked the FBI to investigate what appears to be an effort to smear him, stemming from suspicious emails offering women money in exchange for fabricating sexual misconduct claims against them. Oh, look at that. They took Dr. Blasey Ford's true story about Kavanaugh. Now, you could say that, hey, you don't know for sure that it was Kavanaugh, but even the Republicans admit she was credible. Her story was real. Their best defense is, well, maybe it was mistaken identity. But now they say, oh yeah, let's weaponize it and let's make up sexual allegations against a political enemy. That's what some of the right wing said that the Democrats were doing with Blasey Ford, but they weren't. In this case, it's the right wing going, yeah, who cares? Let's just lie about it and do the thing that we charge the other side of doing. Okay, the plot appeared to be the latest and one of the more bizarre in a string of attempts by supporters of President Trump to discredit Mr. Mueller's investigation as a hoax and a witch hunt. In fact, one of the purveyors of this is Jack Berkman. Jack Berkman is on a great number of occasions said things that were not true, were proven to be not true, and would do like these. He would say, "Oh, I've got an amazing, press conference I'm going to put together about some opponent of the right wing," and nobody would ever materialize. Nothing would ever materialize. But by that time, people had spread it in the press. So Berkman, in this case, has tweeted out some sad news. Hilarious, as if he cares. On Thursday, November 1st, that's tomorrow, at the Rosslyn Holiday Inn at noon, we will reveal the first of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's sexual assault victims. I applaud the courage and dignity and grace and strength of my client. Of course, there is no such person. I'm curious what he's going to trot out tomorrow, but I doubt it'll be anybody at all. He'll probably tuck tail and run, as he often does. Berkman has said, we're going to prove that he is a drunk and a sexual abuser. Oh, that's the same exact thing Kavanaugh was accused of. In this case, you're accusing Trump's opponent, and it turns out you made it up. It's always projection with the Republicans. Whatever they like to do, which is smear people and make up things against them, they accuse the other side of doing. Okay, the plot first came to light through one of the emails referred to the FBI sent to journalists on October 17th by a woman named Lorraine Parsons, who said that a man had contacted her with questions about Mr. Mueller because she had worked as a paralegal with him at a law firm in 1974. Now, that's a very strange story. They can't even find a Lorraine Parsons. So the person turning in Berkman and the other conspirators, we're not even sure she exists. So it's an awfully strange story. But she's not alone. This is, one, they're saying it publicly, oh, we have these people, when it doesn't appear that they can prove it to any of the press, that they have anybody who's actually said any of those things. And then there are others that they try to apparently literally pay to tell a fake story. Another suspicious email, first reported by The Atlantic, was sent on October 22nd to Jennifer Taub, a professor at Vermont Law School, sent by a man who identified himself as Simon Frick, we'll come back to him in a second, a researcher at Surefire Intelligence. He said he was interested in Ms. Taub's encounters with Mr. Mueller and was willing to pay for the information. Now, she did not have any damaging information on him at all, and she was not willing to take a bribe to lie about it. So that didn't work out for them either. Now, who's that Frick guy that was mentioned there? Well, that's not Berkman, so who's Frick? Well, Mr. Frick also appeared to be a false identity. His LinkedIn profile features a photograph of the actor Christoph Waltz. We're going to come back to Christoph Waltz in a second. Surefire Intelligence appeared to be linked to Jacob Wall, a young conservative well known in certain political corners of Twitter, who has contributed to the Gateway Pundit, a right-wing news site. Now, if you watch the Young Turks regularly, you've heard me tell you over and over again, the Gateway Pundit is right-wing propaganda. They don't care about the truth. They print lies all the time. They print lies about me, the show, and just about anybody who isn't right-wing. That's what they do. And so, oh, the Gateway Pundit made something up. No, really. But the reason I tell you that is because the mainstream media will do this story, run the story and about how it's fake, and then they will then look at the Gateway Pundit and from time to time quote it, like as if it's a legitimate part of the media. No, this is what they do. Okay, so let's go back to Surefire Intelligence. Do they exist? Surefire telephone number redirects to Mr. Wool's mother's voicemail, NBC News reported, and internet domain records for Surefire's website are also tied to Mr. Wool. That is so sad. So Surefire Intelligence is very important. We're going to get Robert Mueller. He's in his mom's basement. That's where he's running it from. Surefire is a bit of a mystery, the Daily Beast says. There's a different report about it. Since deleted Craigslist advertisements for the company said it was founded by two members of Israel's elite intelligence community, the ads build services including counterintelligence, private spies, and quote-unquote ethical hackers. None of that is true, especially the ethical part. So it's almost like a Sacha Baron Cohen skit. I've been in Mossad for 13 years, not in Mossad. So he's pretending to be part of the Israeli intelligence community, and again, in reality, living in his mom's basement. At least 7 supposed employees of the company use fake headshots on their LinkedIn profiles. Talia Yaniv, whose page lists her as Surefire's Tel Aviv station chief, uses a photo of Israeli supermodel Bar Raffaeli. Did you think that you wouldn't get caught on that? Anyway, the photo of Surefire's quote-unquote financial investigator is actually actor Christoph Waltz. They're apparently obsessed with him. The company's station chief, this is my favorite, in DC, uses a photo of Sigourney Weaver's husband. Now, how is that for random? How did they even find Sigourney Weaver's husband? And maybe they thought they could get away with that one. But did you think you would get away with some of the most famous people in the world? Clown job, through and through. Speaking of clowns, we return to Berkman. Like Mr. Berkman, Adam Goldman writes in the New York Times, Mr. Wohl did not respond to a message, but on Twitter, he denied any role in the effort. The news media, Mr. Wohl wrote, has launched a coordinated smear campaign against me. Get a load of that irony. The guy's running a smear campaign, then turn around to the real news and go, oh, you guys are running a smear campaign. And of course, the whole point of this in the first place was to prove that Robert Mueller is leading a witch hunt, when in fact, they were doing a witch hunt against Robert Mueller. Welcome to the right wing in America. This is what it has degenerated to. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have the second hour for you guys. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.